Hi guys, here we are with Chapter 9, Human Resources Management. Getting the right people for managerial success. So hiring the right people, finding the right people, determining who the right people are and what those people are going to do. So let's get going. This is going to be, I will warn you, this is going to be pretty term heavy. So we're just going to get going. All right, human resource management consists of the activities managers to perform to plan for, attract, develop, and retain an effective workforce. So plan for, what are you going to need? Attract, making it an attractive workplace to come to. Develop is to help them, improve their skills as they go along, and then also retain them to keep them happy while they're there. So human capital is a term that we use for the potential of employee knowledge, experience, actions, that kind of thing. So that's human capital. There's financial capital and human capital. And one could argue that the human capital is significantly more important than the financial capital, because you can always get more money, but you can't always get more good people. Okay, so knowledge workers, there's knowledge, this whole idea of knowledge workers. I told you this is going to be very term heavy. Knowledge workers add value to the organization by using their brains rather than their muscle and sweat. And as such, they are the most common type of worker in 21st century organizations. It's the knowledge worker. So it's like using your brain, not your body. Social capital can help you land a job. So it's the potential of the relationships. So it's the idea of being able to find high quality. What's the social capital in terms of being able to try to find high quality workers, that kind of thing. Okay, so let's look at this. Strategic human resource planning consists of developing a systematic, comprehensive strategy for understanding current employee needs and predicting future employee needs. So, again, we see here in the line of strategic activities. Once you formulate your strategy and what you want to do and the activities you're going to participate in, then you need to then comes the human resource portion. But again, this chart is right straight from the book. All right, so how do we know what we need? There's job analysis, job description, and job specification. So job analysis is basically determining what the elements of a job are by observing, so an observation. So, for example, if you are someone who's a chef, what is it that the chef has to do? If you're a waitress, what does the waitress have to do? If you're going to be the event planner, if you're going to be, a graphic designer, what are the basic elements of the job? And you do that by observing. Then you come up with a job description, which is, what the job is going to do. And then job specifications, what are the minimum qualifications in terms of education, experience, certain certifications, and that kind of thing that someone needs to hold that job. Okay, so predicting future employee needs. So you might, it's based on things like traffic flow or increased production, that kind of thing. So you want to know what you're going to need so you can plan for it and you can keep your eyes open or start to develop people and find out where they're going to be coming from. And then you do a human resources inventory. It's a report that says who the employees are, what their skills are, and any specific information you might have about them. Okay, so recruitment and selection. Basically, it's finding qualified applicants. So there are two options: internally or externally. So you can hire from within, or you can find people out in the general environment. There are advantages and disadvantages to internal and external recruiting. And I apologize, on the left. Oh, I'm sorry, that goes on top of each other. My mistake. Okay, so internal recruiting, pros and cons. Employees have to, are familiar with the organization, and you already have a good idea about whether or not they're going to fit in. It's much less expensive. And it's less of a risk on both sides. The one thing is, though, that it kind of does limit your pool of people you can hire from, and also people get lulled into this false sense of security. If I stay here long enough, then I'll get hired, and that might not necessarily be true. Or get promoted, and then the other thing is that, one person moves to one job, well, that's an empty job someplace else. So external recruiting, that there might be people who you are hiring might have some sort of specialized knowledge and experience, and they also have a fresh viewpoint, which is very important. And the disadvantage is that it's expensive and it takes a long time, and it's a risk because you don't know the person, and the person doesn't know you, which also could be a problem. Which, when we talk about that, the idea goes back to the idea of culture. They might not understand the culture. So most effective resources for external, without doubt, employee referral, and also e-recruitment tools. The other thing too is it's the idea of that realistic job preview. It tends to be really effective at reducing turnover within 30 to 90 days of employment. So you want to make sure that you go through and actually show, like, if you're going to be the housekeeper, this is actually what you're going to do. If you're going to be the line cook, this is where you're going to be working, and this is what you're going to be doing, and this is what's going to be expected of you, so that people know exactly what's going on before they get there, and there's no surprises. So selection process, you screen applicants and to hire the best candidate, of course, and there's essentially 3 components: the background information, finding out the resume, the job application, interview them, and then you might do some kind of employee tests. Employee tests have become more popular. It could be a technical test, could be a personality test. All right, so interviewing. There's an unstructured interview, that there's no fixed set of questions and no systematic scoring procedure. So you just ask questions to see where the conversation flows. It's not necessarily the most effective way. It's a little bit subjective, and it could be influenced by the bias of the interviewer. But and also, it could be considered illegal if you get into a territory and ask questions. Of course, you just have to be aware of that. However, it also provides a lot more accurate assessment of someone's job-related personality traits, which is important. It's just like having a conversation with someone. So that can be really good. You just have to be careful that you're focused. Okay, interviewing structured. So asking people specific questions. You might give them situations. You might put them, ask them behavioral questions, how they've responded to things in the past and that kind of thing. Okay, so what are some employment tests? Ability tests, I kind of mentioned that before. Physical abilities, strength, stamina, mental ability, clerical abilities, depending upon what the job entails. And then a performance test also. So ability is what is it that you're potentially capable of? Performance, actual job tasks or like job tryouts. Also, as I mentioned before, personality tests that see if you make sure you fit into the organization and that you have personality traits that are part of the culture and part required for the job. Integrity tests, basically depending at, checking on people's honesty, dependability, that kind of thing. And there also might be, drug testing, polygraph tests, that kind of thing. These are all different things that could possibly go on in a job interview. So, talent analytics, this idea of putting in big data and trying to come out to see, where the best person is. And you talk about, you submit a resume. There's certain keywords that are pulled out from people. They use algorithms just like marketers use algorithms to determine who would be, just like marketers used algorithms to determine who's going to buy a product. Hiring managers might use big data and analytics to determine who would be a good employee. Okay, so let's talk about compensation and benefits. Of course, we all go to work to get paid. And compensation is wages, salary, incentive, and benefits. Base pay is the base wage plus sometimes that people are paid. Incentives are you get a commission or you maybe get a tip or whatever, bonuses, profit sharing. And then benefits are things like health insurance, dental, life, disability, retirement plans, paid days off, family leave, that kind of thing. Every people have lots of different things that they might offer. Okay, so let's talk about orientation. Which once you're hired, so you're hired. They've decided that you're good. They've decided that your benefits, you're happy with your salary and benefit package. Now you're at your job, and what happens? So the idea of onboarding. So basically, it's it's orientation and getting people. There's specific programs that are going to help people become more familiar with what the job is all about. And it's in the beginning process. So the first step, of course, is orientation. And I think everyone's probably gone through an orientation in a job, telling you it could be very basic things, determining where things are, telling you about the rules, helping them fit in. Sometimes they might give you a mentor to work with you, that kind of thing. Finding out what the routine's going to be. It's getting acclimated. Okay, there's 5 steps in the training process. One is determining if the training is needed, and then figuring out what it is that you're trying to, what are the objectives, what's the training trying to achieve, increase proficiency on some sort of piece of equipment, increase knowledge about a new product offering, that kind of thing. And then you determine what types of training will be used, and then you implement it, and then you evaluate, does it work? And you go back. And some companies do training internally, some people do training externally, some people do a little bit of both. Usually the bigger the company, the more likely they are to have an in-house training department that might coordinate training, might offer some of the training themselves, but also would coordinate training and bring outside vendors in. Okay, so there are different types of training and development. On the job is actually where you're right there doing it, and you have someone who coaches you, and you might move around from job to job to learn different things. Off the job training is classroom videos, there's some kind of simulation. And then micro learning, it's like when you have sort of basically a small piece of the puzzle that you're taught before you move on to the next level. And that could be done on the job and also off the job. Okay, so micro learning, millions of people are taking short-term practical courses related to their careers, for example, maybe a sales course, public speaking course, that kind of thing. And you would take it, as I said, online, or you take it right there on site. And it has its advantages and disadvantages. It's certainly easier. It's not necessarily, it's this whole idea of e-learning. It has its advantages. It also might be difficult if the task is more complex and you need to actually be working one-on-one with someone. Okay, so then you've been at your job, you've gone through your training, and all these great things have happened. Then you go through a performance appraisal. So what you want to do is define what the objectives are going to be, and then you monitor them, and then you review the performance, and then you sit down with your employee and you talk about it, and you tell them what's going to happen. Either you're going to get promoted, demoted, fired, stay on your job a little while longer, that kind of thing. So here we go. Also called performance review. So you assess the employee's performance, you provide feedback. It tries to be an objective, as most objective behavior appraisal as possible. It's based on facts, not necessarily anecdotes. And it's difficult, so you have things to actually look to and concrete issues. We're going to talk about management by objective later, but management by objective is the manager and the worker together setting goals. So objective, of course, is without bias. Subjective is with bias. So that could be based on the manager's perceptions. So its validity is not really very good, but it's on like on a 1 to 3 scale or 1 to 4 scale. So it's, as I said, it's not necessarily. It could, if you don't get along with your manager, then it could be a very bad way to do it. But if you do, it could be a very good way to do it. And it all comes down to this whole idea of perception, which is something that we talk about more in organizational behavior. So who should do your performance appraisal? One is it's this idea of having a 360-degree appraisal, and that is that people above you, below you, and next to you they get a survey, and they uh, um, relate how they think you're doing. So it can be it can be very effective. There's always going to be some level of bias or some level of someone being afraid of saying that saying things they shouldn't say about their boss, that kind of thing. But you generally get a pretty good feel for what's going on. It prevents people from being nice to their superior, but really nasty to people who work for them, or being nice to the customer and not treating their employees very well. So these are things that are important and that people want to know about in the workplace. So it's a more holistic approach. Okay, forced ranking. Some people say that forced ranking encourages managers to identify and remove poor performers and structures, and then it structures a predetermined compensation curve, which enables them to reward top performers. But people who are against it say that the system eventually gets rid of talented as well as untalented people due to that whole idea of bias. So it's a forced ranking that you've tested against your coworkers. Okay, so how can you have effective performance feedback? So essentially, feedback is formal appraisals. It's the equivalent of you getting a grade on a midterm test and a grade on a final test. So weeks may go by during which you're unaware of how you're doing in the course, but then you do find out. So the informal appraisals are the equivalent of occasional unscheduled pop-up quizzes, sort of, and short papers or drop-in visits to a professor's office where to talk about your work. You have more frequent feedback. That's the idea of the so the informal versus formal, which it's nice to have to kind of, as you're going along, know what's going on. And the other thing too is so if you do something that the manager doesn't like in May, but you don't have your performance appraisal until September, well, you've been practicing doing something wrong the whole time and you don't know. So it's good to kind of keep abreast of that. Okay, so after the performance appraisal, what's going to happen? There's a couple of different choices. You can get a promotion, a transfer, a demotion, or dismissal. Or you might stay in your same job, but that's also a possibility. So those are pretty much what could happen. Okay, then when you leave, oftentimes they'll do an exit interview, and sometimes you can learn really valuable information depending upon how honest people are, and maybe they can find out that the reason that there's all these people leaving is because there's a problem with the manager, or maybe there's a problem, too much work in the position, or maybe the job isn't challenging enough, or maybe there's not enough money. So if you see this pattern, you see a constant turnover. If there's a job with high turnover, there's definitely something probably wrong with the job, not necessarily wrong with the person. And again, if you do an exit interview, sometimes you'll find out exactly what that is as the manager, and it will help you improve your human resource program going forward. All right, so there's all sorts of legal requirements and compliance in human resources. So these are sort of just some of the high points. The Privacy Act, that it gives an employee legal right to examine letters of reference concerning them. Mid-'80s immigration reform that requires employers to verify eligibility of employment by their workers. And then Sarbanes-Oxley, which we've talked about before, which prohibits employers from demoting or firing someone who raise accusations of fraud to a federal agency. Sarbanes-Oxley is we talked about it in the ethics chapter. Sarbanes-Oxley is a very large piece of legislation, and it encompasses many things, including the CEOs and CFOs verifying financial statements, but it also protects whistleblowers, which is important. So certainly there's the Wagner Act of 1935 resulted in the National Labor Relations Board, and that enforces procedures whereby employees may vote to have a union and processes for collective bargaining. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on, and that was really one of the first big labor laws passed. Okay, so compensation and benefits. Employee retirement income security, again, make sure that there's federal insurance to cover bankruptcy loan plans. The FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, which requires employers to keep jobs open for people for a certain period of time while they go off and take care of personal business, such as medical and family reasons. And then HIPAA allows employees to switch health insurance plans when changing jobs and receive new coverage regardless of pre-existing health conditions. It prohibits group plans from dropping ill employees, that kind of thing. Again, HIPAA is a very large and encompassing act, but that's just one of them. And then Fair Minimum Wage Act increased federal minimum wage to $7.25. The minimum wage is always going up and changing. Okay, health and safety laws. OSHA, that has a certain level of safety standards have to be held in organizations. COBRA requires extension of health insurance benefits after someone has left a job. And Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, that employers with more than 50 employees have to provide health insurance for their workers. Okay, equal opportunity. Equal Pay Act, men and women have to be paid equally for performing equal work. Whoops, sorry about that. Civil Rights Act, discrimination based on color, race, color, religion, national origin, or sex. Age discrimination prohibits discrimination of employees over 40. The ADA prohibits discrimination against people with physical disabilities who are qualified. They have to make reasonable accommodation for them. And the 1991 Civil Rights Act amends and clarifies Title VII, ADA, and other laws, and it permits suits against employers for punitive damages in cases of intentional discrimination against employees. If you take when you take business law, or if you take business law, you will learn about many of these things as well. Okay, so moving on from all that legal stuff. Workplace discrimination, big problem. That people are hired or fired that for reasons not relevant to the job, age, gender, ability, whatever it may be, race, religion. But adverse impact when an organization uses some sort of employment practice or procedure that results in unfavorable outcome to a protected class. So requiring, protected classes are people over the age of 40, women and other minorities are protected classes. A disparate agreement, employees from protected groups are intentionally treated differently. This is not good either. That there's some sort of discrimination within the workplace. And as we talked about managing for globalization and diversity in the workplace, these issues are becoming more and more relevant and important for managers to be aware of and sensitive to. Okay, affirmative action is the idea that, excuse me, it tries to make up for past discrimination in employment by actively finding, hiring, and developing talents of people from groups traditionally discriminated against. And affirmative action has been good. It's created a lot of opportunities for women and minorities, but it's also been resisted more by some who see it as working against their interests. So it's a controversial thing. Affirmative action. Generally speaking, affirmative action plans are more successful when employees view them as being fair and equitable. And there's this sort of unfair stigmatization that people who are hired under affirmative action are considered unqualified or incompetent. Okay, more workplace rules. Sexual harassment, alive and well in the workplace, even now. It's any kind of unwanted sexual attention that creates an adverse work environment. There's essentially two types: quid pro quo. If you do this, I'll hire. If you provide this favor for me, then I will hire you, or if you don't, I will fire you. So, and then hostile work environment is this idea that there's a sort of intimidating or hostile work environment that has been created. There are certain steps you have to go through. The sexual harassment laws are detailed, and there are processes, but it certainly happens, and unfortunately, as I said, it's still alive and well in the American workplace, both in private and government. Okay, bullying is any kind of abusive, physical, psychological, verbal, or nonverbal behavior that's threatening, humiliating, or intimidating. So People. It's easy for people to bully people. There's lots of bullies out there. It's usually based on some level of jealousy that they have or insecurity. But it's important that you hold your own and stay strong and don't react to them and don't give them the reaction that they want back. Okay, moving on. Talked about a little bit about collective bargaining, labor and management. So there's NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. It enforces procedures whereby employees may vote for a union in collective bargaining. Collective bargaining is basically when managers hire and determine issues about compensation and benefits, working conditions, and job security as a whole, not on a one-by-one basis. And then labor unions are organizations of employees formed to protect and advance their members' interests by bargaining with management over job-related issues. So that's the union. Just to give you an idea, unions are really declining in terms of size and number in our society, but it just gives you a little brief view of it. 11% of full-time U.S. workers are in the union, 6.7% of private sector workers are, and 35.2% of public sector workers are. So it's not quite what it used to be. Okay, so 4 kinds of workplace agreements. Closed shop, union shop, agency shop, open shop. Closed shop is illegal. That you can only hire people within the union. Union shop is that workers aren't required to be a union member when hired for a job, but they must join the union within a specified period of time. We're going to take a look at a map that doesn't, the right to work clause. Agency shop, that people have to pay the equivalent of union dues but aren't required to join the union. And open shop, they can choose whether or not they want to join the union or not. Okay, so right to work laws, excuse me, which is just as a reminder, that's where the union shop not allowed in 22 states. And the states that it's not allowed in are those dark blue ones. Okay, now then, moving on. Compensation. There's essentially 2-tier wage contracts that, this is for the union, that new employees are paid less or receive less benefits than veteran employees. So that's an issue with some people who are like grandfathered in. COLA, or cost of living, that the period of the contract, future wages increase based on the cost of living. And then give back is it's like bargaining chip, essentially, that they might give up benefit gain, some kind of gain for something else. It's like a no layoff policy or whatever it may be. Okay, and then finally, how do you settle labor management disputes? There are grievances, so someone complains about something. They feel like the terms of the contract have been violated. Then there's mediation. Hopefully that will work. And if that doesn't work, the people go to arbitration. Mediation is that a neutral third party listens to both sides and makes suggestions to how to come up with a solution. Arbitration, it usually makes a binding decision, and it could be, there are professional arbitrators who are usually practicing attorneys or judges, or practicing attorneys or retired judges. Okay, so that's it on human resource management. As I said, it was lots and lots of terms, and we will be back with Chapter 10 when we talk about organizational change and innovation. Okay, thanks, guys.